Good evening and welcome to the Drive at 5 on IntellectualRadio.com/iHeart radio station. I'm your host, Roman. We have a good show planned for you today. Please stay tuned to IntellectualRadio.com after the Drive at 5 for Warriors Talk with Rochelle at 6 p.m. Tonight, my guest is a community leader, an organizer, and candidate for Congress in the 7th District. Please give a Drive at 5 welcome to Katina Collins. Welcome to the Drive.
It's Kina.
Kina, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Kina,
Close.
yeah. Well, hey. So please give intellectualradio.com/iHeart radio station your background.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the South Austin community, two working class union parents. My dad is Teamster, my mom is SCIU. And yeah, my background is in gun violence prevention work. Literally, I jumped into that work because I witnessed a murder in my community and I could identify the victim in the shooter, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life. And I think that that's the story of so many young people across the country. I went on to continue that organizing nationally around gun violence prevention work as a student at Louisiana State University, and organized gun owners in Louisiana who believed in a lot of the same issues that we were talking about around common sense gun safety, like banning assault rifles and universal background checks. And in 2015, I got a call from some Black Lives Matter activists here in the city of Chicago because Laquan McDonald's tape had been released. Organizing or co-organizing rather a lot of the direct actions around Laquan McDonald. A lot of that work really empowered me to delve into the public policy and find out, where was the system failing, and the entire system failed. And I wrote my first piece of civil rights legislation in 2017. Governor of all people was governor here in the state of Illinois. I worked
What it consist of?
Huh?
Your piece of legislation, what it consists of?
It was called the Illinois Council on Women and Girls Act, and it talked about basically creating a commission that advises the governor and state lawmakers in Springfield on any issues that directly impact women and girls across the state of Illinois. So that ranged from healthcare to closing the pay wage equity gap. Right. And one topic that's coming up now is reproductive health care. That was also one of the amendments in the bill. And, we built this really strong coalition and we were able to get it signed into law under a Republican governor. And Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton now serves as the chairwoman of the Illinois Council on Women and Girls. But that was like my first real, I could do this. I'm organizing, I'm building coalition, I'm writing policy, and I decided to run for office. The reason why I decided Congress of all the seats was because I was working with doctors and medical students across the country fighting for a universal healthcare system, which doesn't exist right now in the United States. And I'm pretty sure folks, Roman, who are not insured or don't have health insurance. And I was training these doctors to be advocates for patients across the country. And then I ended up finding out that, I had to do a power ranking of all the congressional members who were taking corporate PAC money from pharmaceutical and private insurance companies. And to my surprise, Congressman Davis was taking some of those campaign donations. And that's important to Illinois 7th because we actually have the largest life expectancy gap in the nation. If you live in downtown Chicago, you live to the age of 90. If you take a 30-minute car ride to the south side of Chicago and West Englewood, your life expectancy drops to 60. And so I decided to run in 2020. It's an uphill battle whenever you go against an iconic incumbent like Congressman Davis. We came in second in a 4-way race, and now I'm back in 2022. And I think we're stronger than ever.
What is your platform for Congress?
Yeah, I think that one of the number one issues that are really important in the 7th district from Westchester, Illinois, all the way to West Englewood, that's how far our district spans, is public safety. People want us to strike at the root causes in the heart of what is causing that. And as somebody who grew up and still is in the South Austin community, the thing that's causing a lot of the crime that we see and the public safety issues is poverty, in my opinion. And I want to make sure that we're fighting for those manufacturing jobs to come back to the Midwest, particularly to the West Side and South Side, that Black folks in these communities are getting contracts for things like the infrastructure bill that just got passed, right? That was a huge omnibus bill that was just got passed, and it was a ton of money. I want to make sure that Black folks are at the table around the green energy and initiatives that are happening. It's projected to have $23 trillion pumped into the green energy and just green economy in the next decade here in the United States. Are we securing those contracts? Are we making sure that we're giving people off ramps so that we're improving the quality of life? I think the second thing is we have to chip away at this 30-year life gap. So in my first 100 days, I want to put together a healthcare and life expectancy task force in the Illinois 7th of experts across the districts. That includes doctors, parents, students, environmentalists, small business owners. And I want us to work on the recommendations to chip away at this 30-year life gap that exists. And then the final thing is relief and recovery in this pandemic. That means that we're extending the child tax credit, that we're fighting for those things, that we're extending raising the federal minimum wage so people can have a livable wage that they're working on, and that, we're centering the voices of working class families.
When people introduce you, they introduce you as a progressive Democrat. Are you a progressive Democrat, and are your progressive views align with the 7th congressional district?
Yeah, I mean, I think progressive is it's like you said, it's a huge net. Some people call Joe Biden progressive, some people call AOC or Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders a progressive, right? I see myself right now as an independent reformer. I think the Democratic Party needs to center the voices of working class Black folks in this country, especially young Black people who are dealing with things like gun violence and not having the workers' rights that we need, fighting for things like eliminating environmental racism, like the lead in our water in our communities. So I see myself as an independent reformer coming into the Democratic Party and stepping into leadership while centering the voices of working class people.
There is a lot going on locally and nationally. One issue in particular that is going on everyone's mind
Mm.
are taxes. What can you do or introduce to Congress to alleviate taxes for people who are hurting from the gas pump to the kitchen stove?
Man, that's such a good question. I support Senator Elizabeth Warren's platform of the ultra wealthy tax.
What is
I,
that?
it's essentially making corporations and billionaires pay their fair share in taxes. People like Donald Trump, who actually served as the president of the United States, paid less in federal tax than my parents, who are manufacturing workers. That's because there are loopholes that millionaires and billionaires in this country have access to that everyday people do not. And so I support, taxing the wealthy in this country. I support a Wall Street tax in this country. Amazon is a perfect example. They paid zero in federal taxes. You and I can't do that. And so if you're making billions of dollars every single year and you're making a profit out of these billions of dollars, then you need to, I think, lean back into our economy and pay your fair share in taxes.
Some people believe major gas stations and corporations are price gouging or manipulating prices for the American people to make up profits during the pandemic. As Congresswoman, do you think it is time for Biden to introduce a task force like the Obama administration did when
Mm,
in order
yep.
to prevent price gouging at the gas pump?
100%. And I think we need to go further than that. We need to ban the ability for our elected officials to take campaign donations from people like BP, ExxonMobil, and Shell, and a lot of these
But how
gas
would you do
stations.
that when you have a Congress that's so evenly divided, and it's going to be hard
Right.
to
That's
say
a
something
valid.
like that and then actually do it is another.
Well, we've actually run a campaign where I've taken zero corporate dollars, and we've had lobbyists who've tried to write me checks to my campaign. We've actually outraised everybody in this race, including the 25-year incumbent. And one of the biggest um, critiques that I have of Congressman Davis is that our district is so deeply Democratic that we don't need to take corporate money, and he has. And actually, Congressman Davis has taken campaign donations from people like BP. When we see this predatory behavior happening, and we see it happening to Black communities in particular, um, when are we going to stand up and say that these things are wrong? But when are we going to act, right? In our campaigns. So one, I don't think that it's difficult to say these things or to live these values out. It takes political courage and it takes a moral compass in order to do that. But number two, big money in politics. Corruption is probably the biggest issue that we have in Washington, D.C. Giant corporations that have our government by the throat. And that's why we see them not moving forward on a lot of these issues. But taking big money out of politics is a bipartisan issue. People all across this country, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're feeling that pain at the kitchen table when it's $7 at the pump in some places, right? When milk is $8, right? So I think that this is something that we could really activate the electorate around to push their legislators on and make them support.
Do you think it's time for a 90-day federal tax moratorium on the gas?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that any way that we can come in and bring alleviation to the people in the United States around inflation, around a lot of their pockets being hit, then we need to exercise that. We need a debt moratorium. We need an eviction moratorium. Some people are working 2, 3 jobs and are still living paycheck to paycheck. In a moral and modern and wealthy America, that should be unacceptable.
Gas prices are up and prices are up also at the grocery store. Prices for a package of chicken is close to $20 at the supermarkets. People have to choose medicine or eat, pay a bill or eat, a roof over their head
Yep.
or eat. What would you say to those people who have to make those sacrifices and choices on whether to eat, pay major bills? You say to that?
That it's wrong, and that our elected officials have to be held accountable for that, because ultimately these decisions, um, really the accountability has to go on the corporations as well. How is it that these corporations are making record profits and they're still driving the prices up on a lot of the items in these stores and even at the gas station, right? And so your representative is supposed to be there to serve as representative democracy for you. And I think us not achieving things like extending the child tax credit, not pushing back on corporations in this country, it has a lot of people infuriated, and voters are in the right in that. And I think that it's morally and it's politically and it's economically not smart.
Housing is another issue. Homeless is on the rise, especially in major cities and communities alike, including in the 7th congressional
Mhm.
district. On December 14, 2020, your opponent introduced a bill called the Homeless Children and Youth Act of 2021. The bill modifies definitions relating to homelessness individuals and homelessness children and youth as used by the Department of Housing and Urban Development to verify eligibility for HUD homeless assistance programs, including the continuing program care program. Specifically, the bill aligns these terms to the definition of homeless used to verify eligibility for other federal assistance programs. The definitions are also amended to increase access to federal homeless programs by homeless children, youth, and families. Additionally, the community-wide homeless management information system shall be made available to the public for HUD's website. Some would say the bill does not go far enough to curb homelessness, and some say it is a start. What do you say to that bill?
I mean, I think it's necessary, and all ways that we need to come in and intervene, we should, particularly around young people. There are 16,000 homeless students in Chicago public schools, and those students slipped through the cracks, and that number expanded as the pandemic took place. And so I support expanding a lot of Obama era policies like Section 201 of HUD that talks about being able to use Medicaid to pay for rent, right? Any and all the ways that we can make sure that we're alleviating that um, issue for the housing insecure in Illinois 7 and really across the country, we need to do that.
When a person applies for assistance for housing as well as utilities, it takes an organization up to 90 days or more to receive assistance. If someone is on the verge of eviction or foreclosure, it takes an organization a long time to give that assistance to the landlord or a mortgage company, especially if it is
Mhm.
verified they are in desperate need for assistance to avoid eviction or foreclosure. As Congresswoman, how would you curb that problem? You have organizations say, if you need help, come to us,
Mhm.
but there is 90 days, 100 days, 160 days in order to receive the money. How can the landlord or the mortgage company say
Right.
this person applied for it? It give us 60 days. How can you alleviate that?
Yeah. This was a big issue that came up in the pandemic, and the Biden administration actually created a fund, an emergency federal money that was in the legislation around COVID relief money, um, basically giving relief to both the landlords and the people who needed rental assistance. But I think that we have to go a step further, and we have to lift those time frames and make sure that we're funding the ability for landlords not to fall into debt, but mostly that people are not being kicked out of their homes during a pandemic. We know that having a house is literally, or having a living situation is one of the number one social determinants of health, and having people out on the street um, during the spread of this pandemic is just not safe. And so all measures need to be put into place. But I support expanding that funding to make sure that we're not leaving landlords high and dry, and we're also not leaving those who need rental assistance
Speaking
housing insecure.
Speaking of assistance, the emergency allotments were authorized under the Families First Coronavirus
Mhm.
Response Act to help address temporary food needs during the pandemic for SNAP households. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, this was breaking news that the EA amounts are equal to the maximum benefit for the household size minus their monthly benefit. In essence, the EA payments can be made as long as there are a national public health emergency. That is set to expire in July 15th.
Mhm.
As possible Congresswoman elect, what will your plan of action from day one, because it's set to expire, you have your opponent still in there.
Mhm.
How would you work with him
Yeah.
to create a
That's
solution?
that's a really good question. Um, Number one, we're going to have to get out into the communities and reach the people who really don't know that these resources exist. Like you just laid out a really great way and a resource that people could have. A lot of folks don't know that these opportunities exist. And so, really using and expanding our volunteer base to work alongside the congressmen to make sure that we're reaching the community, that we're educating the community about the resources
But
that
it's
they
set
need.
to
Inspire,
expire July 15th.
right.
Once those funds, and unless Biden, expand it.
Right. So I was with
Go
my
ahead. Go
second
ahead.
part.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. My second part to that is that you got to use your bully pulpit, right? And that means that you got to make as much noise as possible and really apply the pressure. And some people say, well, that doesn't work. Well, student loans have been paused for 2 years now because people have been making the noise and organizing on the ground around the cancellation of student loan debt, which so many Americans have. And so I think that you know
But some people would say that Biden is picking and choosing to alleviate those student loan debts. And it's
mhm,
kind of like,
mhm.
why you just can't do it across the board.
Just do it across the board. I agree with you. I have no disagreement there. But this is where really, like I said, using the bully pulpit, we know how important, in particular, and we know which community is being impacted by this most is the African American community, and that is the community that delivered the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives for Democrats. And so we need to mandate that they pay attention to the crises that are breaking out during this pandemic, and that they deliver protection for these families across not just our district, but across the country.
It was announced I think a couple of months ago, the Illinois will participate in the SNAP hot food programs. And it was announced here first. Other states are doing it. Why not Illinois? So the SNAP restaurant meals program starting late spring of 2022. Now I'm going to fast forward because of timing.
Yeah.
The SNAP restaurant meals program will reside at DeWitt County, Franklin County, or Cook County with the following zip codes of 60619, 60620,
Mm.
60628, and 60617, and meet certain criteria. Illinois will be rolling the program out to selected areas over a period of time. Now, the 7th congressional district, which consists of 43.1% Black, 30.8% white,
Mhm.
7.7% Asian, Hispanics 18.4%, median income 64%. The reason I'm saying this, to point this out, is that it is those zip codes I mentioned is predominantly white areas with a 94.5% and an income of little over 55%. Why nobody's putting pressure on the governor saying, hey, that's not fair. You're Congressman elect. How would you put your bully pulpit to the test on the SNAP program?
Number one, on every single level of government, from the Cook County Commissioner to the aldermen in some of the most impacted areas, and the state reps and state senators, we will literally have to convene and come together. And Roman, this is a really good point that you bring up, because Austin in itself is the largest neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. Well, the second largest neighborhood in the city of Chicago, and it's one of the largest in the district. 96,000 plus
Actually, the
people.
second largest in the state.
City. That's what I'm saying. Second largest in the city, the largest in Illinois 7th, the neighborhood.
Okay.
It has 96,000 plus people, and we only have 3 grocery stores. And so there is a case to be made that the people in this area, and these particular areas, which is the 60644 zip code, that we are
60651.
Yep, that it is food insecure, and that we do not have the security that we need around food in the district. And I think a case can be made, but it's going to require us convening government officials on every level, just like you broke down the different counties that have been considered. We're going to have to work on the county level, and then we're going to have to use our state legislators in order to push the governor on that.
Crime is another concerning issue in the 7th congressional district. Crime has increased across the board, including Oak Park and western suburbs in the 7th district. As a community organizer and activist whose work has focused on gun violence and criminal justice reform, how would you curb the crime in the 7th district?
The good news about Illinois 7 is that there is no shortage of good people who are trying to stop a lot of the crime that is happening across the district. The problem is a lot of these organizations are overworked and underfunded. We saw that with the ceasefire program. We saw that with the violence interrupters. Browner actually gutted the entire line on the budget. And so we need to make sure that we are funding those. We need to rebuild.
People will argue, and sorry to interrupt, some
Mhm.
people will argue with you that there are organizations,
Mhm.
which I will not name,
Mhm.
on the West Side have received millions
Mhm.
and millions of dollars and have totally done diddly squat to curb the violence. And they go after these funds. Politicians give it, and you got to give
Right.
them credit. Politicians do give them the
Yep.
money, and they sit on their you know what and do absolutely nothing.
Well, what I
How would
say
you
is,
hold those organizations accountable?
well, I mean, they're one component. What we have to understand is that violence is not just people pulling the trigger and punching somebody or carjacking. Yes, all of those things are things that people are concerned with in the district, but violence is also public school shutdowns and the evisceration of mental health services in this pandemic alone. In the last summer, we saw the vaccine shutdown site for Loretto Hospital, right? Like, that's violence. Those are life-saving necessities that people need in order to thrive in a community, and we don't have access to those
But to
things.
be fair,
And so,
you mentioned Loretta Hospital.
mhm,
To be fair, it was some hanky panky going on at Loretta Hospital.
right.
That's why it was kind of shut down.
Right.
Um,
It's corruption. And
right.
I think that it lends to the question and the comment that you made about funding being sent. We have to hold people accountable. I'm not saying that we are, but violence interruption programs in themselves are one component. We have to strike at the root causes of poverty and a lot of the other issues that are happening breaking out across the Illinois 7th, and make sure that those things are funded adequately. And if we look at the city budget, it is not funded adequately. Violence in itself is a multi-billion-dollar problem, and we have not seen the resources poured into youth services. I mean, there's
But
just
how can you like alleviate
well,
them
you
getting the money?
yeah, you fight for the federal resources, but you got to bring back the voices of the community to the table. Oftentimes, when we sit in these meetings, we see the same exact people being invited to the table, which is, exactly what you're talking about. You know that there are organizations that get millions of dollars. Well, sometimes you have to talk to just regular taxpayers across the district who oftentimes do not get that knock on their door. They don't have a block club established on their block, right? There's not a sense of community. And then you have other areas in the district where they are really supreme at block clubs and they got it down packed, right? I think that your representative and elected officials need to serve once again as conveners. Yes, we need to fight for the federal dollars, but we need to hold folks accountable. When we see a city budget that's lopsided and we're not seeing an investment in education and housing and healthcare, and we don't even have basic things in our community like grocery stores, of course we're going to see crime. And so striking at the root cause of that crime is poverty. And I believe in accountability. If you take the life of an innocent person, you should be held accountable. But where is the investment in the prevention before these bullets fly or before these carjackings even happen?
Given the situation, what happened on January 6th, how can you tackle justice reform if the Senate lacks holding people accountable for January 6th? You're talking about justice reform. That's your main platform. You see how's it they recently somewhat reached a deal and a lot of people say, hey, I know you're frowning up, but
Mhm.
this is your bread and butter. You got Joe Manchin, Susan,
Kristen Sinema, right?
cinema,
To
and you have to deal with that
Yeah,
until they get out of office. You say to that.
I think that when we look at the Civil Rights Act, right, of the 1960s, they were dealing with a lot of the same problems, right? And they still continue to organize and they still continue to persist. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And what we saw on January 6th was what Black folks and a lot of people across this country had always known, right? White supremacy rearing its head and trying to overthrow our government. I think that when we see an obstacle, that doesn't mean that we don't speak out and we don't organize against that obstacle. There's so many things on the table that we cannot concede. Voting rights, the autonomy of people having autonomy over their bodies.
But I know you're mentioning those.
Mhm.
However, what is mentioned according to the AP, the Associated Press, those timelines are about to cease, meaning the clock is running out on those bills, meaning the Civil Rights, the Voting Rights Act. So, as Congresswoman, how would you make that?
Right. You organize the people in your district and you organize people across the country. I mean, if the
But they
timeline
can
runs
only
out,
do so much, though.
so do we not push back? Do we just sit back and let it happen? Or do we fight on the state level? Do we make sure that protections are put into place and that we still fight for that funding? I say we fight back. I think that there have been very contentious times in American history, and this we're not the first generation to deal with that. I think that we need bold leaders in this time. We need people who are going to speak unapologetically to a lot of these issues, but to just sit back and let them steamroll over us without organizing and challenging them in primaries, getting these people out of seats. I think that Joe Manchin, the cavalry, should be sent into West Virginia. I think Kristen Sinema needs to be primaried. I think we need to put our best and our brightest out. We need to organize our people, and we need to get them out of their seats and hold them accountable.
Redlining is another issue along with guns crossing the border. Majority of crimes with guns are guns crossing the border, and
Yeah.
In Illinois,
Mhm.
especially in Chicago,
Yeah.
crossing state lines. And can you explain to us, how can you make gun crossing state lines a federal issue?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that comes down to gun manufacturers. And that's something that we don't talk about enough, is the supply side of guns. What I always tell people is, people nationally like to use Chicago as a political punching bag around the issue of gun violence. There's not a single gun shop in the city of Chicago. There's not a single shooting range in Chicago. We don't make guns. And so we're not spreading gun violence to red states, but red states that are Republican run, like Indiana, Wisconsin, Mississippi, they are spreading gun violence to the city of Chicago because their guns, 60% of them are being recovered by the Chicago Police Department. And so that's fact number one. I think that we need to lift the liability shield on gun manufacturers federally to make sure that they could be held accountable for negligence around how these guns are being illegally trafficked and the profit that is being made off of these guns. I don't think that a single individual needs an AR-15. I don't think you need 100 rounds in a clip. I don't think that you need those things. And so I'm going to support legislation, focus on that. But most importantly, we need to direct our attention on the gun manufacturers in this country and make sure that they're being held accountable. 90% of Americans support universal background checks. They support these common sense gun safety legislation pieces. I served as the executive director for one of the largest gun violence preventions in nonprofits in Illinois, One Aim Illinois. And my whole job was to make sure that we were helping enforce the gun dealer certification licensing bill, which basically says that we need to inspect gun manufacturers and gun shops. So I'll give you an example really quick, Roman. 850 guns that were recovered by Chicago Police Department last year could be traced back to one gun shop in Indiana. One. So we know that this is the common denominator, and yet this gun shop is not being held accountable. And so we know the statistics and the data. 60% of our guns are being trafficked from out of the state. The other 40% are being bought in gun shops in suburban Illinois. And those two gun shops need to be held accountable because a lot of crime is linked to the guns that are being sold from their shops.
Very quickly, as Congresswoman, how can you unite the 7th congressional district?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've seen in this campaign is that we have volunteers all across the Illinois 7th. The number one issue that is important to everybody is safety in their neighborhoods, being able to send their kids to safe schools, making sure that we're fighting for a rising tide here in the Illinois 7 for everybody. And so I think that the basic and the common needs, whether you live on the west side of Chicago or in the Gold Coast, people are expressing the same concerns. We really just need a leader to make sure that we're creating a coalition for a united Illinois 7th, not just servicing some parts of the district, but all parts of the district.
So please give intellectualradio.com/iHeart radio station how they can get in contact with you. What is your punch number and
Thank you
your
so much.
website?
First off, I just want to say thank you, Roman, for inviting me on. You did a lot of work to make sure that I got on, and I really appreciate you because this is democracy in action, and not a lot of people are giving candidates the platform. So I thank you truly. Folks can follow me at KinaCollins.com. That's KinaCollins.com. You can find me on Instagram at Kina, Kina, the number 4 Congress. And I'm on Twitter at Kina Collins IL. That's my @ name on Twitter. So please go to the website. My punch number is 31. Early voting has already started. It's going to be from now until June 27th. And then June 28th is the election day. And we're asking everybody to fight for the future in Illinois 7.
All right. See, it wasn't that bad.
Oh my goodness. No.
Thanks, and
I'm
don't
when we win, I'm gonna come back.
when don't be a stranger to the Drive at 5. That's going to do it for us on the Drive at 5. Thanks to Earl Winfrey, our executive producer. Wonder behind the scenes. You guys have a wonderful week.